and Wallich archival materials housed at Central National Herbarium, Calcutta. The talk. With this brief detail about the Dr. Mark Watson, I would like to request Dr. Mark Watson, please come over the dais and share your presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Well, good afternoon, everybody in the room, and good afternoon, everybody out there in the cybersphere. It's really a pleasure to be here in Kolkata in the Central National Herbarium and talking about one of my favourite figures in the history of botany, that of Nathaniel Wallich. It's particularly pertinent to be talking about him as he will be a figure which you all will know the name, either as Wallich or Wallich. Doesn't matter how you pronounce it. And he was superintendent of the garden and lived for many years in just very close to here in what is now known as Roxburgh House. So he used to live there with his family. I'm going to, in this talk, try and give you a brief overview of his life and career. If I tried to go into it in any detail, it would take several lectures in its own right. And then I'm going to concentrate on the Wallet Catalogue, really explain that, what we did with that, and how you can use it. And then end up looking at his the Wallet Correspondence, which is here in the Central National Herbarium, and give you a bit of an example of why it's so important, not only for botanical, historical research, but also sociological, anthropological research in its own right. I hope you'll find this interesting. You're very welcome to have copies of the presentation. Some of it has unpublished data in it, so wait a bit before you maybe write it down. This is probably my most crowded slide, but I wanted to get everything about his life in a summary in one slide, so it's a handy reminder for you. Many of you will know the picture of Wallich as an old, wrinkled prune of a man here at the end, towards the end of his life. But I'd like you to think of him as a youthful man, as he was here at the Kolkata Garden in his first stage. So this painting here is Wallich in 1832. So he would have been just in his 40s. It was painted in London just before he returned to Kolkata for his second stint in India. Another nice pictures, portraits of him is this chalk drawing here, and an engraving which I think is basically based on that original oil painting. When he went back to England after retiring from India, that's when you get the older pictures. And this very end picture here is one that Henry Nolte took in Copenhagen. And I don't know the date of that, but it was when Wallich was given his medals, Danish medals here. So think of him as a youthful man, not as the wrinkled old man that you see so often in illustrations and on Wikipedia even. So Wallich was born in Copenhagen in Denmark in 1786 into a Jewish family. He did his medical studies in the Royal Academy of Surgeons and graduated in 1806, and then was appointed assistant surgeon to the Danish East India Company. He was then posted to be the surgeon at the Danish colony of Sørenport, just opposite Barakpur, which was then known as Frederiksnagård. He set off in early 1807 on the ship, and the routing of the ship in those days from the Danish side of things was down to Rio de Janeiro, down to the Cape, and then round the Cape and up to Kolkata. And he arrived in Sørenport about November 1807. just as an aside, he was already collecting plants at that point on his route to India. And the earliest specimens which are in the Wallet Catalogue are a handful of ferns collected from Rio de Janeiro in 1807. They're very, very interesting, but that's the only specimens which survived into the Wallet Catalogue ready distribution. He was only at Serampore for a few years when there was political turmoil between Britain and Denmark, and Serampore was taken over by the East India Company, and Wallich found himself to be a prisoner of war. He was soon released because they realized his academic usefulness and his medical qualifications, and he worked with William Roxburgh for several years. In 1811 and 1813, there was his first bout of really serious ill health, and in order to recover his health and to survive, he took a journey to Mauritius and spent just a couple of years there. And there are specimens from Mauritius in the Wallet Catalogue. When he returned from Mauritius soon after in 1814, he was formally joined the British East India Company as an employee. And around that time, in that year, he also became the first curator of the Indian Museum, that illustrious institution in Kolkata. Opportunity came for him to join the Kolkata Botanic Garden as superintendent after, firstly, his great mentor William Roxburgh left India and returned to Scotland in 1814, towards the end of 1814. Roxburgh was succeeded by Francis Buchanan Hamilton, but only for 4 months. And when Buchanan Hamilton also left to go back to the UK, Wallich was the natural appointment as acting superintendent. Now, there was over the next few years, there were a few to-ins and fro-ins with Wallich not being the superintendent and then finally being appointed the superintendent of the Kolkata Garden, but I won't go into the details there. I'll point out that when he was made, fully made superintendent of the Kolkata Garden in 1817, he then undertook a series of plant collecting expeditions and also extended his network so that he asked people to send plants, both living and preserved, to the Kolkata Garden. And this was really the start of the Wallich, the East India Company Herbarium as it's known now, and the Wallet Catalogue. He sent two of his collectors to Nepal in 1818, and he himself visited in 1820 and 1821. And I'll say a little bit more about that a bit later. When he returned from Nepal, he had ill health, and again he had a sea voyage to recover his health, and he went off to Penang and Singapore and made seminal collections there. A few years later, he was then again in the fields off in Myanmar. By 1828, his health was failing badly. By 1827, his health was failing badly, and he was given permission for a furlough back in Britain. Now, furlough is paid leave, and he was given initially, I think, three years paid leave. Part of the reason was to recover his health. Very authentic. Part of his reason for going back to Britain was to recover his health, but also he had a lot of work to do. He had the huge herbarium that he had amassed, and also he wanted to publish a lot of his new discoveries. And I'll come to that a bit later. The result was the Plantasiatica rariores, that fabulous 19th century book. He returned to India in 1832, back to the superintendentship of the garden, and then had a series of duties, including forestry and the exploration in search of tea. That again is a lecture into itself, and other people are much better qualified than me to talk about that. But notably, there was the Assam expedition in 1836 with William Griffith and John McClelland, where William Griffith had a huge falling out with Wallich, and that rumbled on for several years after. In 1846, Wallich retired from India, travelling back to London, where he had various other activities, including working a lot with the Linnean Society of London. He also completed the distribution of the Wallet Catalogue in that period. But he was only there for 8 years because he died in 1854, age 68, which wasn't bad considering his health was such a problem throughout his life. And he's buried in Kensal Green Cemetery in north of London. I spent quite a long time just going through that slide, but I think it's useful to have all that information in one slide. This illustration on the left here is Wallich lecturing here in Kolkata, and it shows you that he was not just created a garden here, but he was also a teacher, and he taught botany and particularly the use of medicinal plants here in Kolkata to medical students. Wallich didn't actually publish a great deal himself. Many people of his publications. There are a couple more after 1832, but for brevity, I've just put these ones up, and I'll highlight the fact that these first two publications were in Asiatic Researches, and some of us were looking at those in the library just yesterday. They were write-ups of rare Indian plants that he had found in the Kolkata environment, and some in the Sundarbans, but also included specimens which were sent back from Nepal. More of that later. After returning from Nepal, in fact, while he was in Nepal, he wrote a book. He wrote a manuscript book called Philocogia Nepalensis, dated 1821, which was the year he was in Nepal, and just he came back in early 1822. This is a tremendous account of the phones of Nepal, but was never published. And you have in your archives here, as far as I know, the only copy. I think another copy, of at least partial one, was sent to his mentor Horneman in Copenhagen, but I think the primary one is in your archives here. It's up with the Wallet Correspondence. Based on his explorations in Nepal, he took Roxburgh's Flora Indica manuscript, and with William Carey, they helped edit that into publication. Wallich added quite a few new entries based on the Nepal material. And volume 1 was published in 1820, volume 2 was published in 1824, highly edited. Unfortunately, there was at least one more volume, and that was never published. Also, at that time, he was experimenting with lithography, which is a method of printing which is much quicker and much cheaper than engraving, which they had to rely on until then. Lithography was a technique which became popular in London in the 1810s. So in 1820, when he was using it in India, it was pretty much new technology. And he tried to produce an illustrated book based on the plants that he collected in Nepal. He called it Tentamon Flora Nepalensis. It was intended to be published in 3 volumes, each one with 4 fascicles. He only published 2 of those fascicles and then stopped. This is the book that was the first botanical book to be illustrated by lithography in India. You have I think 4 copies of the first of those fascicles. He published a small note on the camphor tree from Nepal. But then the last 2 things in this list are ones which are probably going to be the most familiar to you. One is the numerical list, which we generally call the Wallet Catalogue. And the other one is Plantasiatica rariores, which was the spectacularly illustrated book published in 1830 to 32 when he was in London. Here are two plates from each of the Tentamon flora nepalensis and also the Plantasiatica rariores. Now, the vast majority of the Tentamon illustration, the Tentamon copies are unpainted. So I think this is the only one, and I've actually forgotten whether this was. Well, I think this copy is at the British Library, and I think it was one that was presented to the King. So these ones here are really rare painted illustrations. An interesting feature of the Tentamon is, well, you can't see it so well from here, but at the bottom here there is the artist's name who painted the original illustration. Yeah, and at this side there's the artist who prepared the not the engraving but the lithography. So here Wallich is giving credit to the Indian artists and artisans who were working with him to illustrate his works. In fact, when you look at the Asiatic researchers' plates, they also have those, which I think is the earliest example of European botanists actually crediting the work of Indian botanists who are supporting them in a publication. Plantasiatica rariores was completed in 3 volumes, and it's probably the most lavishly illustrated botanical book of the early 19th century. And you have copies here, and it is absolutely fabulous. I'm going to spend probably most of the time of this talk talking about the Wallet Catalogue. The full title of the Wallet Catalogue is this: Numerical List of the Dried Specimens of Plants in the East India Company's Museum, that's the museum in London, collected under the superintendence of Dr. Wallich of the company's Botanic Garden in Calcutta. It's known by many other names, but I tend to call it the Wallet Catalogue because it's the simplest. It's in its complete form, it's 306 pages. I've put 268 plus 38 because it was the first phase of the distribution. 268 pages were produced, and then after Wallich ran out of time, had to return to India. There was a maximum, I think, of 5 years where you had a furlough, so he had an extension on the original number of years that he had to return, and he completed the distribution with the help of George Bentham in 1848, I think. This book, I call it a book, but I'll explain that it wasn't really a book, was published by Transfer Lithography. And in nomenclatural terms, that's indelible autograph. So basically, Wallich wrote out on a piece of waxy paper the names, the pages. This was then reproduced by lithography to produce the pages of the Wallet Catalogue. And because it's considered to be a kind of indelible autograph, then it's considered to be effectively published in the International Code of Nomenclature for plants and things that are traditionally considered plants. The Wallet Catalogue, and we're going into some detail in the next few slides, contains details for all this, of the original collecting place for all of the specimens which were in the British East India Company Herbarium at that time, which Wallich reckoned was over 9,000-ish species. And there were many duplicates because Wallich was sending them to many recipients. So there are at least 20,000 collections of those 9,000 species, and each of those collections is made into many duplicates. Wallich wanted to spread this botanical resource as much as he could. And eventually he was able to send material to 64 original recipients, primarily in Europe, but there was one in North America. And then later on, a set came to Kolkata. Of those 64 original recipients, 32, actually 33, because we found another one of the copies yesterday. 33 copies. You have 2 copies of the Wallet Catalogue, which was extremely exciting. So we now have 33 copies, original copies. And there are 7 later versions. And those 7 later versions are a little bit confusing, so I'll mention a little bit about those later. So the botanical importance, I hope that most of you, particularly those who work on higher plants, will have heard of the Wallet Catalogue and probably had occasion to refer to it. There are thousands of plants which were first described, or if you like, named in the Wallet Catalogue, and that's an example of it here. This is a classic entry of the species. The species name here, Salvia rugosa, Salicia rugosa Wallich, and it was collected from Tavoy by William Gomez, WG. Many thousands of new names, but there are no descriptions, therefore they're all nomina nuda, according to and invalidly published. So they're effectively published, but invalidly published. The vast majority of those new names. Occasionally they refer back to an original description, sometimes in Roxburgh's Hortus Bengalensis, but primarily they are nomina nuda, and they were published by later authors, validly published by later authors. So you need to understand the Wallet Catalogue and the specimens which are underneath it in order to interpret a lot of the new names which were published by later authors. So when you are doing your typification, retro-typification of these names that are published by later authors, you really have to understand what's written in the catalogue and how to interpret the specimens underneath. And that was really the driver why we wanted to try and make the Wallet Catalogue a digital copy of the Wallet Catalogue, to make it online so it's freely available, linked to the original top set of specimens which are in the Kew Herbarium. And also, this handwriting is pretty bad to read. Even for a native English speaker, it's difficult. So we wanted to try and transcribe all of the information in here and make it available to anybody who wants to use it, whether they can read the original or not. And that example of William Gomez is a classic one. There's lots of abbreviations. You might know what HBC is, Hortus Botanicus Calcutta. So the Calcutta Botanic Garden, but many of them are a bit more cryptic, and even things like HB 1824. These things are not necessarily self-evident and not explained in the catalogue, but we can explain them on the Wallet Catalogue online. So how was the catalogue produced? Going back to 1828, when Wallich was setting up his factory, it's probably best to think of it as a factory in London. He rented a flat in 5th Street in Soho, set up his workshop, and proceeded to unpack all of the specimens that he'd brought back with him from London. He retrieved the specimens he'd sent in advance back to in 1824 and 1825, I think. That's what the HB 1824 means. These are specimens that were sent back to London before he came back. And he enlisted a range of helpers, and botanists from around Europe turned up to help, because actually by turning up to help, you ended up getting a set of specimens. So one of the Decondale's son came and helped, and others from around Europe and from British Isles came and helped with the distribution. It was a huge task. Now, with those specimens, he didn't want to write out the collecting detail on each specimen every time, so he had this idea of producing pages of label data by lithography, the same technique that he used for Tentamon florinepallensis, but this, instead of being on nice paper intended to be published, these pages of the Wallet Catalogue were printed on thin, very, very thin paper and intended to be cut up and stuck on pages, but stuck on the herbarium specimens. And some of the people who received herbarium specimens from the Wallet distribution did indeed do that. Others kept the pages, put ticks against the specimens they received, and then eventually bound them into what is now known as the Wallet Catalogue. So he used transfer lithography as we might use photocopying now. It was just a cheap way of distributing information. And he didn't print the whole thing in one go. He printed them a few pages at a time. Once he'd completed writing out all the things on one page, he would then get it printed. And then when he was finished with one bundle of specimens, he would put the pages of the Wallet Catalogue in with that bundle and send them off to the various people that were receiving specimens. So it was done in a kind of very piecemeal way. Even the letter, which an example of here, is produced by the same method of lithography, effectively photocopying. It's a form letter. The chairman of the East India Company presents the compliments to a person and the specimens they're going to have of the collections of duplicates from the East India Company Herbarium. And this one was sent to Bloomer in Germany and in Leiden. And he kept it, which was great because we have the archive material to show what happened. And some of the Wallet Catalogue pages have interesting annotations on them. And there's one here, I think this is from the Missouri copy, and it says 75, similar to this, 10 shillings and 6. So we know that he produced 75 copies of that one page, and we know how much it cost. Right. So there's some interesting archival and historical things in there. So here's a page from the Wallet Catalogue, and I just want to give you a sort of summary of how we standardize things and how we think about these. So each entry, each numbered entry here, 64, 65, 66, etc., corresponds to a species. And then next to it is the name that Wallich ascribes to it. So sometimes, like Dicksonia apediculata, it's his own name. Other times he's referring to names which other people have coined, like Dicksonia arborescens by Herrick. Sometimes he includes synonymy underneath that. And there we have here under Cheilanthes mysorensis, Wallich's name, we've got Adiantum, I can't read that, Melanocordon by Hayner. So Haynes sent specimens to Wallich with that name on it. So he's given some synonymy to help try and interpret some of the names which you see on the herbarium specimens. When there's just one collection, so we have the details of the collection under here. So the mountains of St. Helena, 1828. Well, actually, this one was collected on his journey back. So he was still collecting as he went back to the UK, or he went to the UK. So mountains of St. Helena. When there's only one collection locality under a species, then it's not given any number. But when you have several collections like the one at the end here, and here, Cheilanthes rupestris, yeah, We've got Singapore 1822 and Tavoy, William Gomez. And so he's given the numbers 1 and 2. And so these are traditionally referred to as 71.1, 71.2, and so forth. But there are some issues in that even if there's one collection, say this one Montai Nepali, although there's only one entry there, it may actually refer to more than one gathering because he wanted to send as many duplicates out as possible. So when he was in Nepal, he may have collected this species 2 or more times, and each one will have a field ticket giving a date. And for the catalogue, he's put them all together and sent them out. You can only tell that by looking at the Wallet Catalogue original set, sorry, the Wallet Herbarium original set of Q and seeing the original field tickets. So there can be some hidden problems here. Let me go to the next one here. I can't remember if I've just going to zip in. Okay, right. I'm going to say one other thing. Later on, Wallich was given some extra material, and sometimes he was given material of things he'd already published. So later on in the catalogue, there may be addenda and extra entries. So for something like, press the wrong one there. So he may have been given Dicksonia arborescens, more specimens later, in which case he might have given, he would have called those 64.2, etc. But because 64, the first one is would then have to be considered to be 64.1, but it's not written when it first appears in the catalogue. So there is an issue there. And also at some point in the catalogue, he decided to go from 1, 2, 3 to A, B, C. So there are some confusions in the standard referring to the standard way you can refer to these sub-collections. So the phases of the Wallet Catalogue, I alluded to the fact that this was not done all in one go. He between 1828 and when he had to return in 1832, he progressed up to page 268, and there was still a pile of things still needed to be done. The first lot were pages up to page 59, and this was Wallich's own material. And he got up to number 2,159. At that point, he'd been going at it for just about a year. The East India Company realised he was doing such a good job. They said, "Hey, we've got these other boxes of stuff, other boxes of herbarium specimens in our museum. Would you please include them in your distribution?" And at that point, he was given several boxes, or quite a lot of boxes of extra specimens. And he indeed included those. Those included Roxburgh material, Hain material, others from Mysore and Tranquil Bar, and important collections such as Finlayson, and also the Francis Buchanan Hamilton specimens from Bengal. And actually, another piece of archive material we have upstairs is the catalogue, a copy of the catalogue which Buchanan Hamilton did, which gives you much more information about those specimens than is in the Wallet catalogue. So it's another treasure you have kept with the Wallet correspondence. The last entry, so there is a block of addenda and corrigenda where those extra materials provided extra specimens of the species already covered, so you had to add those in as corrections. Sorry about that. And he was very good at producing an index to families and genera at that point before he went back. As he was going back, the top set of the herbarium and the catalogue was given to the Linnean Society of London, 1832. He returned in 1846 or 1847 and worked with George Bentham to complete the final residue of this distribution, and that was done in the pages up to pages 306. Now, some of the people who received the collections had died in that intervening time, So they didn't actually get that extra material. So when you're looking at copies of the Wallet Catalogue, some of them only go up to page 268 and others include all 306 pages. So you've got examples of both of those. The main copy of the Wallet Catalogue, which is stuck onto supporting pages, is the full catalogue, and the extra set that we found yesterday is only up to page 268, which is still incredibly important. Once they completed the work, they didn't bother updating the indices and so forth. So there's those last pages, there's no indexes to them. Well, the last part of the story is that in 1905, the Linnean Society was trying to reduce the amount of collections it had. And it gave all of the collections to Kew Gardens in 1905. Sorry, 1905. I think that was under the Thistleton Dyer time period. I think that's about the time period that the Wallet Correspondence was given to you guys here in Calcutta. The Wallet Correspondence was originally at Kew, and in fact is bound with Kew library stamps at on the spine. But it was given to Calcutta because that was felt that that was where it would be most useful. So I alluded to the fact that the Wallet Catalogue is not a book at all. And evidence of that is that there's actually no title page. It goes from an explanation of the type, if you like, the title of the work is here, but it's not really a title. It's just an explanation of what it is. Then there's the introduction to what the book what the pages are, and this one it basically says it's simply to avoid the effort of having to write out all of these collection labels, and then it goes straight into the listing here. It's only printed on one side. There's no margins for binding or cropping, and the paper's really thin. There weren't even any page numbers on the first. There weren't even any page numbers on the first 50 pages. Wallet was not intending this to be a published book. It was just it was a convenient way of getting label data to people. But after a year, he realised that people weren't actually doing that. They were keeping the pages and binding them into books. So he started including page numbers in the lithographic pages. In fact, if you look at this, this is if you like, a reconstruction of some of those pages, and you can see that they were folded and just bundled in with the specimens. They were never. Wallich knew what a good book should look like, and this is far from it. Okay, so I alluded to the fact that there's some problematic copies of the Wallet Catalogue out there, and I'm going to quickly give you an account of why they are problematic. Okay. What happened was only one set of specimens was sent to North America to a guy called Svindit, and he never kept his copy of the Wallet Catalogue. In fact, he just handwrote the data on the specimens and threw away the pages. So there was no copy of the Wallet Catalogue in North America. And Asa Gray went to the Linnean Society in the 50s and requested that the spare set of the pages could be given to him to be at the Arnold Arboretum. The Linnean Society had a residue of old pages and things, and it put together as good a set as it could, including some which were quite smudged and some which had Wallich's annotations on them, and they sent off the copy to Asa Gray in North America. And this copy had some of the working pages, and if you look at the very first page, you can see they're different. Okay, so this here is the standard one, and this here is the one that is in the Gray's copy of the Wallet Catalogue. You can see it's got many more species listed on there, and it's different. And in fact, this is an early draft of the first page. Wallich was just practicing, and only one page was struck off, so it was like a test. But the Linnaeus Society didn't realise that, and they bundled it away and sent it off. And this is just to show you that the difference between them is not just the content of the species listing, but it's I call them the simply things. So the object of the following list is simply to supersede the necessity of writing out numerous labels. And then in the standard one, it's the principal object of this list is to blah, blah, blah. So I always look out for the word simply when I'm looking for these dodgy copies. The problem is that the copy which is in the BHL was Missouri Botanic Gardens copy. Now that was made from the poorest residue of pages that was left, plus photostats from Asa Gray's copy. So it's probably the poorest version of the Wallet Catalogue, which is out there. And it's got this, the front page is the Asa Gray one, photostat that. So it's not the same as the original. So I call this the Franken book. It's a book that's been put together by bits, like Frankenstein's monster. So be careful when you're using the online version on BHL. I wouldn't use that. I'd use the online one on the Wallet Catalogue online. Okay. So I mentioned the fact of why the Wallet Catalogue is such a headache for taxonomists, difficult handwriting, many abbreviations, and so forth. There are frequent numbering errors, which you pick up if you go through it in a methodical way, many inconsistencies, and these extra corrigenda and addenda are spread throughout the book. So it's actually a really difficult book to try and use. So we decided to produce an online version of that, and the first phase of that was what we call the cruncher phase, which was to take digital images of the whole book and then mark it up with notation of numbers and sub-numbers. And you can see here we in square brackets we put the sub-number 1 when there's no entry there, just so that we've got a standard way, so that if another one is entered later, then we can refer to that in a standardized way. The second phase of that was to take those pages and chop them up digitally, and then for each entry to start adding the transcription of that. And a lot of that work was done by the staff at RBGQ, as well as digitizing their collections. So they contributed hugely to this project. This, I must say, has been going on for the last maybe 15 years in fits and starts when funding has become available. We were able then to link to specimens which were in the Wallet Catalogue in Kew, but also to specimens in our own herbarium and in Berlin. And with the specimens online here in Kolkata, we can add those two as well at some point. So this is the Wallet Catalogue online. If you hover over any of the numbers, then you'll get the details. You can type in the collecting number here, or in fact any data you wish, and it will just do a general search for you. You can hop back and forwards in the pages if you're reading it by doing that. Okay, this is when you get down to an individual entry, you have not only the original page here, so entry number 526. There was only one entry there from the Nilligrews from Noton, but on a later page, page 235, another entry was entered here from the White Herbarium, and this is given sub number B. So we're giving this one number 1 because that's as it was in that part of the catalogue. And the information we provide here is just a standard transliteration of the data as is, and then there's information on standardized on where it's from and who the collectors were. So we hope that this kind of information will give you been able to interpret the data in the Wallet Catalogue. And this is the link to the specimen here in the Kew Herbarium. So you can go and look at that. Just to show you another couple of pages. It does get pretty complicated when you have to create sub numbers and different numbers. I won't spend any more time on that. So the benefits of having the online system is that you can see everything relating to one entry in one go. We standardized the notation so that this is the first time that it's been standardized, and Wallich's mistakes have been created. So that's what all those square brackets you find are all about. We provide the verbatim transcriptions, and we've standardized the data as much as we can. We're in the process of trying to provide more helper files, because there are, whenever people ask us questions, we tend to write that up in a little blog, the answer. So that helps, because there's common things get answered by people, asked by people. That's the team at Kew digitizing the Wallich Catalogue, the East India Company Herbarium. You can see it's actually pretty filthy. Did you get to go to Kew when you were there? Did you see this, Siam? Did you see the Wallich Herbarium? No, some of you seen that? Yes. It's pretty filthy, isn't it? The specimens have got a lot of soot from the dust and smog from the 19th century at Kew. Yeah, yeah. Good. Okay. So that's all I'm going to say on the Wallet Catalogue, and now just a few words on the Wallet Correspondence, which this photograph was taken yesterday upstairs. It's the Wallet, I think it's 30 volumes, or maybe it's 31 volumes of correspondence, which are the letters that were written to Wallich, and occasionally there are copies of Wallich letters that he wrote to other people. Originally they were all in bound copies like this, bound volumes, but those volumes have become very fragile over the years, and through a project with Rani Prakash and from the Natural History Museum in London, and I believe Kew Gardens as well, managed to get bring over archival boxes. So these books are protected in these archival boxes, and now they're in these cabinets and things, and are protected for the future. They had been in a poor condition in the old library, but they were saved along with a lot of other important archives and printed works, and are now kept safe here in the National Central Herbarium. It's a huge resource, because these are all the letters that Wallich received, not only from people around India and then surrounding countries, but also from Europe. So there are letters here from botanists all around the world, basically. And it's really important in helping understand the contributions that people made to the scientific study of the natural history of India, particularly those which don't tend to feature in the final printed works. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a few minutes. Just to give you an example of the kind of thing you might expect to see, there's an index that Wallich provided. This is the letters he received in 1823. And then the individual letters, I think the whole thing is arranged chronologically. So if you're wanting to find letters but from any one person, they'll be spread throughout the volumes. And this one here is by Robert Stewart in Kathmandu. So it says Kathmandu residency, Nepal, 1819. I can't quite read that. So March the 12th, maybe? Okay. So this one is actually very, very easy to read for me as an English speaker. A lot of them are very difficult because the ink is often blurred, and the handwriting of some of those folk is really, some of the people that are writing is sometimes really terrible. So it's a challenge, I guess, for people to read. But if you take the time and you transcribe these letters, then you can find a wealth of information. Over the lockdown period, I transcribed all of the letters from Edward Gardner and Robert Stewart, both of those guys based in Kathmandu in Nepal, to to Wallich in Calcutta. They were sending plant material and other material down to Wallich through the postal system, then called the DAC and the Bangi. A letter would take about 10 days to go from Kathmandu to Kolkata, which is pretty amazing considering the distances and the terrain. It's a pretty efficient system. Parcels used to take a bit longer. And that's really opened my eyes to the flow of plant material back and forth from Kathmandu to Kolkata, but also the approach that the people were making and the roles of the Indian botanists and Nepali collaborators were making to this exploration, if you like, of a Nepalese plant, scientific exploration. These illustrations these letters are also of anthropological and historical research. Now, you may recognize the face of this chap. Yeah. So Martin Krieger from Kiel University is a historian, and he's visited Kolkata several times with some of his people, and he's worked on the Calcutta, the Wallet Correspondence. And from that work, he's produced, he wrote a book, a biography of Wallich, an excellent biography, published in 2017. Unfortunately, but it's in German. It's not unfortunate. It's in German, so it's not so easy for me to read. And Henry Nolte and I have been working with Martin in order to try and get an English language translation of this work. And that's being published by an Indian publisher, and we think very soon, hopefully within this year. So all that information which Martin has put together on the life and times of Nathaniel Wallich will be available in English to you all. It is absolutely fascinating having read the translation now.
Yes.
Using Wallich in his old age. I'm encouraging Martin Krieger to include one of these early pictures of Wallich. So just to give you a little bit of background, Wallich was himself in Nepal in 1820 and 1821. And this was the first visit to Nepal by a non-diplomat, i.e. a non-official, a non-European official. So yes, a European person who wasn't part of the diplomatic mission in Kathmandu, the British residency. Wallich arrived in December 1820, having travelled. I think he set off from Kolkata Botanic Garden in July that year, but he took a roundabout route because he wanted to collect plants on the way. And he arrived in Kathmandu in December 1820 and spent pretty much a full year in Kathmandu, confined to the Kathmandu Valley. He wasn't allowed out. But one of his collectors, Bharat Singh, did make several trips to Gosang Kund, which was then called Gosang Pan. In November 1821, Wallich left, and then he took 2 weeks to get back to Patna, and then arrived back in Kolkata, I think sometime in January. He fell ill on the way and had to stay to recover on the way back in India. Now, this is a sort of a summary of the letters which are in the Wallich Correspondence relating to Nepal. These are letters written by various natural historians to Wallich over the years. And we start on, and the different color codes are, the blue ones are Francis Buchanan Hamilton. There's just a few of those, but you can see it's spread throughout his life, Buchanan Hamilton's life and times there. By far the largest number are the ones by Edward Gardner in orange. Then there's a period whereby Robert Stewart was acting resident, so the green bars are Robert Stewart's letters, while Gardner was away for a year. And then Brian Hodgson, who's a famous famous particularly for his zoological studies in Nepal, took over as a resident in Nepal and took up the correspondence of the resident of Nepal to the British resident of Nepal to Wallich in Calcutta. I was particularly interested in the Gardner letters and the Stewart letters, and that's what I did over lockdown. I think I transcribed about 100 of them, 200 of those letters, and then abstracted all the different stories. I mean, they talked about Nepalese paper on many letters, and I sort of got all those together. And they talked about the Jumla mountain rice because they thought they might be able to grow that back in the UK. No, they didn't, but they sent some mountain rice back. But one of the letters, well, one of the things which they talked about was a stuffed otter, and I had no idea what this was, and I just collated that into my abstractions. And then in around Christmas time, I read a paper by David Lowther, just recently published in Archives of Natural History, on the discovery of the red panda. And Thomas Hardwick, which is another name which might well be known to you as a great natural historian. And it relates to the painting and the description of the red panda, which is at the Linnean Society of London. Thomas Hardwick, which also would deserve another full lecture in its own right, was a soldier, but he was collecting plants and animal drawings and descriptions for many years during his time in India. He was there for 44 years. And at the time of about the 1820s, he was stationed just outside Kolkata at the military encampment at Dum Dum, which is now the airport. So his collections are probably the largest collections of natural history drawings ever formed by one person. They're mostly at the Natural History Museum, but they're also at there's a few at the Linnean Society, and there's a good set at the British Library. And Hardwick was very well connected with Roxburgh and Buchanan Hamilton and Wallich, as we shall see. He left Calcutta in 1823 to retire back to England. Hardwick sent this, this is the drawing of the red panda, which is the Linnean Society, which has rather gruesome paws that have been cut off at the top. You see it's sort of like the stump is there in red. So Hardwick realized this was a new species. The story is that Hardwick realized this was a new species, and he realized it was an unusual animal. He sent the drawing and the description down to the Linnean Society, so from Calcutta to London. It was then read at the Linnean Society at a meeting such as this in November 1821. It wasn't then published because at that point Hardwick didn't consider it to be a new species. When he came back in 1823, he re-looked at his description and realized that it would be it should be described as a new species, and he penciled on the manuscript that he wanted to call this Malaporus wallichii. But it was not, the actual manuscript wasn't published in 1827, so it took a long time. Fortunately, in his description, he also included the local name of this, the red panda of War, and that was also reproduced in David Lowther's manuscript. And that name rang a bell to me because that name appeared against the name of the stuffed otter, which is in Gardner's letters to Wallich. Come back to that in a second. Unfortunately for Hardwick, the French zoologist Frédéric Cuvier, working in Paris, published this animal as Aurus fulgens in 1825. So Hardwick was beaten into publication by the French. And Cuvier got the material from Alfred Duvercel, who was a French collector working for the Paris Museum at that time. Looking at the Bharat Singh side of things, in the letters, which are upstairs, the letters, we know now that in October 1818, Bharat Singh, who was Wallich's Indian collector, bought the skin in a Kathmandu market and gave it to Gardner as something unusual. Gardner then sent it to Hardwick via Wallich, saying, this is Bharat Singh's stuffed otter. We're not sure, we think it's something interesting. Hardwick immediately wrote back saying, yes, this is very interesting. Please get me some more material and find out more about it. And Bharat Singh was then sent to the market again to talk to the traders, buy some more material and find out about where this animal came from. And in the letters, there are descriptions of where the animal lived, what its feeding habits were, what it was called, and what it used to eat on. This was when the local name Wiles came into the process. And while Edward Gardner sent this additional material down to Hardwick, who included all that information in the description given to the Linnean Society, there was no way that the description to the Linnean Society could have been written without Bharat Singh having made that further collections and got that indigenous knowledge through his discussions with the traders and those who knew the animal in the wild. And this illustration here is the skin and the jawbone, the skull of the Red Panda, which is now at the the Naturalist Museum in London. And the label here says Alurus fulgens, Bengal, collected by General Hardwick, an Indian museum up the side. Now this may be the first material which was sent back by Edward Gardner to Wallich, but it might have been some of the later material as well. So we're not quite sure whether this is, if you like, type material, but it's certainly material that Bharat Singh would have collected and sent down. Okay. So I forgot to say that in the zoological literature, it's usually Wallich that gets the credit for collecting this plant, this animal. Yeah? So through the use of the Gardner letters to Wallich, we're able to set the record straight and give the true credit to Bharat Singh, who was the guy who recognized this as an unusual thing and bought it and gave it to Gardner to send down to Hardwick via Wallich. So Wallich's role was really just as a go-between. And the other piece of the puzzle is, where did Alfred Duversel get his material from? Because this is a Himalayan animal. I'm not used to talking about animals. Okay, and this is where we turn to a map of Calcutta at that time. Alfred Duversel and his French compatriot Pierre Médard Diard was stationed in the French colony, if you like, at Chandrinagar. Thomas Hardwick was based at Dom, and Nathaniel Wallich was based here. We know from the letters that Duversel wrote to Wallich, letters which are also upstairs, that Duversel and Wallich knew each other, and Duversel was visiting the Calcutta Garden, and that they planned to meet Hardwick. We also know from the letters, from the later letters that Hardwick wrote to the Linnean Society, that Duversel came to see Hardwick as well at Dom. And it's highly likely that, those letters are about in 1822. So at that point, Hardwick had already sent the material back to, he'd already completed his studies and sent the material back to London. It's highly likely that Thomas Hardwick was the one who showed him the drawings that he'd got of the Red Panda and given him a skin. Actually, the material that was sent back to Paris was was a bit tatty. It wasn't a complete skin, it wasn't a complete skull. So it seems that Thomas Hartwig gave some extra materials to Duvercel, who then sent them back to Paris, and then it was then published by Cuvier. So the material that was used for the French name was also the same origin, so also Bharat-Singh. So Bharat-Singh should get the credit for finding the material of both of those routes, which I think is pretty neat. And I've got a paper in Archives of Natural History explaining that, just being reviewed now. So I'm going to stop there. I hope that this talk, through this talk, I've not only explained, given Wallich a bit of, giving you a bit more information about Wallich that you might not have known, and I'm hoping that that's going to be available in the not too distant future, because there's a wealth of information out there, a wealth of information in those letters which are going to support research in a multitude of fields, but particularly showing the role that local collaborators had, the seminal role that they had in the discovery of, or the scientific documentation of the natural history of India. Now, I also hope to show that transcribing those letters is actually quite a tough task. Those are difficult handwritings, even for native speakers. So this has to be an international effort of joining hands in order for people who are native speakers in German, in French, in English, and in Danish, and other languages which are represented in Latin, and not native speakers in Latin, but they understand Latin, to be able to transcribe the letters and give that information back to store with the letters, so that the transcriptions I have can be put alongside the letters that you have here. I certainly didn't do this alone. There's lots of people I need to thank. There's just a few of them here. The ones on the left here, starting Bhaskar Adhikari and ending with the Q Digitizer, the people who've been involved with the Wallet Catalogue online. And then on the right, there's people who've been involved in that uncovering the story of the Red Panda, or Bharat-Singh's stuffed otter, and then just a few of the funding sources in the centre there. This Finney is what Wallich wrote at the end of his Wallet Catalogue, and you can just imagine the relief. I've finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll be happy to take any questions if anybody's got.
We are extremely happy to know that we are having two Wallich Catalogue, which was unknown to us. Today only come to know that we are having another copy at our library. So thank you for that information also.
No, you're very welcome. In fact, I should give a mention to Christopher Fraser Jenkins, who came over here and was looking at a lot of the archive material. Then he said that he'd seen one, but I wasn't able to find it on my last trip, and we didn't know whether it was still here or not. But we're delighted. I think everybody's delighted about that. And in fact, we were able to find some of the original artwork by Indian artists for those early Asiatic researchers papers, also up in the library and archives here, and recognize them for what they are. And they look like some of the earliest, or maybe if not the earliest, examples of artwork from Gorachand, Vishnu Prasad, and other Indian artists of that period. So that's extremely exciting as well. Something to work up together later.
Was there any Indian collector for the Wallich?
Sorry?
Was there any Indian collector for the Wallich?
For the Wallet Catalogue?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are lots. So there are Indian and also Indian European, like William Gomez, probably Indian and Portuguese parentage, Francis de Silva the same, Bharat Singh. I could go on. That's a study in its own right to try and uncover the roles that those people played. And partly it's in the Wallet Catalogue, because we've digitized the whole catalogue now. We can actually look through and find out how many entries are by Francis de Silva, how many are by William Gomez and those people. But that's only a basic part of the information. I think a lot more information about those people are in those letters yet to be found.
So, Mark, I am having another question.
Sure.
In the catalog, we know that most of the names are nominative, but there are few names which are very big. Can you put some light on that?
Yeah, it's pretty complicated trying to find them. So the names which are validly published are usually ones which refer back to a previously published description, and some of those are new combinations based on names which are in Hortus bengalensis, Roxburgh's. That's one that jumps to mind. So you can't discount them all as being nomen nuda, but it's not always easy to uncover whether there's something below. You should, if there's a reference to an earlier work in the Wallet Catalogue, then that might be a little like a light bulb to say actually there might be something. I know that David Maberly has done a lot of work in the past on those cryptic references, but it's usually on a case-by-case basis.
So there are certainly some names which are not common to the English.
Yeah, but not many.
I can remember one of the names.
Oh,
I think
great.
Robert Brown has validated through the indirect reference.
There
So
you
first, only one I find so far. It is belonging to probably Rubiaceae.
So
I can tell you that name also.